about being contaminated by the water. And I believe that all of us out here are entitled to have our wells inspected and tested.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I think that would be very important. If the resources to do that could be obtained, I think it would be important. I think that private well supplies and private wells, unfortunately, are a fairly high-risk water supply, and as development takes place in places that previously were used for other kinds of uses, industrial, agricultural, or have the potential for contaminants to migrate into the well, that routine, periodic sampling of private wells should be done. So I think that's a very important measure. Obviously, it's a resource issue, and but I think it's an important one that would be the subject of appropriate advocacy by the community that says, you know, particularly based on what the initial results come through. If the initial results are truly representative of kind of the wells in the community, that's going to help us understand. It's going to help you understand, is the well water something that's potentially a problem? If, however, it is a very limited amount of sampling or is indicative of problems in certain areas, certainly an appropriate follow-up response would be to do more and additional testing of the wells in this community. I think that would be very important.
I believe that every resident, every home, every well here should be tested.
This is more an observation. I mean, I'm concerned about everybody's well-being here, but you know what might be also supportive data is your pets. Because they're also exposed to getting bathed in the water. Some of them drink it. My dogs have always had the bottled water because I don't like the water in the area anyway. And I have had 2 animals die of cancer in the last 4 years. And the one I have now, and my mother who bathes in this water, has severe skin infections. Mm-hmm. So I think you need to look beyond that for further evidence, or else you're going to have another W.R. Grace.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi there. Are there any prophylactic steps we can take to protect ourselves meanwhile, because waiting for the testing for water and soil is going to take some time? In the meantime, I want to know what I can do now. Based upon your history, were there certain procedures that were done to the well water to protect the people from that point on until we get the results?
I want to try to be as practical and helpful as I can. There are practical steps that you can consider taking to prevent or reduce exposure to potential pathways of environmental exposure. The woman who just spoke talked about using bottled water to drink. That is clearly something that can be done. In terms of bathing, that's a much more, that's a harder thing to do something differently about.
But what I want to, but in your past cases, you've had to have come across a situation before, so there must have been something that the people did to change the situation around?
Yes, there are. But what makes sense to do usually is driven by what risk or what exposure it is you're trying to reduce. And the problem you have here, and that's, you know, it's a real problem. I don't know what I would do in this circumstance, is you don't really know what it is. So I think what you have to do is take the whatever reasonable steps you're comfortable with in the lack of better information. There are filter technologies. There's reverse osmosis. There's carbon filtration. There are other kinds of technologies that do remove many, many contaminants from the water.
What about petroleum and chemicals such as that?
Yes,
Reverse
they are
osmosis
generally they are quite effective for removing petroleum constituent contaminants. Carbon filters also play a big role there. And, you know, one of the other easier and practical things is minimize, you know, your showering time.
I don't think I...
Hi, my name's Charles. I'm a 40-year-old man that lives out at 59-1. I just got diagnosed with prostate cancer and tumors on my spinal cord. And with all the whitewashing the government's used to doing and everything else, what I want to know, other than the testing of the wells and everything else, why isn't there something set up for the people of the acreage to get free testing? And nothing is being done, but you hear a lot of hearsay and everything else about you're doing this and you're doing that, but nobody has really seen any results of anybody doing anything. The acreage, if you look on the map, it shows over 100 and some odd people that's gotten cancer today. The residence I live at now, we just had to put a dog down from a brain tumor, and now I'm potentially looking at dying from cancer myself. And what I want to know is why isn't something being done for the people of the acreage to have them tested, not just the well water?
I think the best answer I can give you, and it's not a great one, and first I'm very sorry about your condition, but these things often work incrementally. And one of the things you know, I think it's important to understand about government is they are responsive to communities, but they have to have data and facts backing them up. Because if they said, we will test everyone in the acreage for illness or other kinds of things, a community down the road would say, well, what about us too? We have a lot of cancer. And so for governmental action to provide the kind of resources and the kind of intervention that makes so much sense, as a practical problem, present difficulties to government. One of the things that helps that, however, is data. And so if data comes back showing there's some problems in the groundwater, then the case the community can make to say, this is a problem, we need resources to test the people in it so we can understand if we can catch something early that can receive quicker and more effective medical intervention. That's a very, very important step.
What more evidence do you need? Do you need more children or more of our brothers and sisters around here dying before you also finally start doing something? I mean, if you need evidence to look around and see what people's concerned, just look around you here now. Everybody in this atrium is concerned about their families, their friends.
That's a fair concern, but you know, to help you understand that, that's not my call. I worked in government as an environmental enforcement person for 7 years, and I saw, and it's something to understand, that the community has a real power, because when they focus attention on a problem and demonstrate that, it makes a difference. Government responds. And so I can't tell you there's a magic amount of data that's necessary, but the important thing to do is to make sure that that data is collected, that it's disseminated, and that the fill that the gentleman talked about earlier also gets tested. That falls within the jurisdiction generally of a state environmental agency, and that type of focused advocacy can get the kind of data used to empower the community.
Good evening. I want to start by thanking you for taking the time to come out and talk to the community. And, briefly, if you can explain to us, what is your credibility as an attorney to cases and at this magnitude? Have you handled something like this before? And second question is, why is it just the water being tested? Why can't we just send the proper agency to come in and test not only the water, but the soil, the airborne, whatever it might be, happen, instead of step by step, okay, if it's not the water, okay, time is not on our side at all.
Well, you asked, I think, very good questions. I'm really, as I said at the outset, I'm not really here to talk about a lawsuit in this community. I think that's too early. So I don't think this is the appropriate time or forum to talk about, cases that I've been involved with in Pratt. I think the important thing is really your second question, and the best response I can give you is that I think the government agencies that have responded to the community and the community advocacy have taken, in essence, a stepwise approach. So as I indicated earlier, when a community is on private wells, that traditionally is the first place you look. And so I think they're taking it one step at a time, and it's very important, if they don't find anything, that these other issues that have been raised tonight, the gentleman talking about the fill, the air, they get looked into, and I think that is vitally important, and time is very important in doing that.
And how can we, as a community, make them test it a little quicker? Who do we contact? Do we start with the health department, the senator, Obama?
I would don't stop anywhere. Knock on every door you can, email anyone you can, and just as a community, as Lem said, you have a lot of collective power, you have a lot of individual power, and right now you need to mobilize to protect yourselves and your families, and I think you just have to stay on it, keep the visibility going, keep the internet communications going, because the visibility will help drive the urgency of this situation. So it's up to the community to continue to pressure and continue to demand the response that the government has a duty to provide.
Thank you.
My name is Tibet Weiner. I am the owner of Landmark Consulting. I am a soil and groundwater expert. I'm here to help the community. If this is, and it sounds like it's a heavy metal, probably an arsenic, chromium or lead, possibly from Pratt Whitney, possibly from the construction debris. Irregardless of the source, what will be the proceedings after we find out what the contaminant is?
I think the best answer to that is that the proceeding can take a number of shapes. Number one, there could be a public governmental proceeding. The government has the obligation to enforce laws designed to protect the community. There are state laws, there are federal laws that can be used if a responsible party can be identified to compel them to take remedial action. And if they don't, then government steps in and does that. And so that's one possibility of a public proceeding. And as I talked about for a little bit this evening as a general matter, there's a potential for a civil proceeding in which injured or harmed members of the community would enforce their private rights to redress the situation, and those types of civil proceedings can include injunctive relief that requires a responsible party to remedy the problem, to abate a nuisance that they have caused or contributed to. So broadly speaking, those are the kinds of proceedings, the kinds of follow-up that can be used to fix these kinds of problems.
What are we doing to fast track this? It sounds like time's not on our side. I'm available to help if anyone wants to see me afterwards. But it sounds like we really need to focus on what it is and where it's coming from fast.
Yes, thank you for listening to this question. What we learned at the health department was that Pratt Whitney, after the hurricanes, had a valve that broke. And during that valve malfunction, that 150,000 gallons of jet fuel were leaked into the facility. And as quickly as that is said, they said that was contained. And it really was not more information given on that. So in my thinking, if they test 50 wells now, it's not going to tell the contaminants after the hurricane. Another factor being, with something I learned at the health department meeting, was that we're mostly on limestone, which during a drought can act like a sponge and pull in these chemicals so that they might not have been at the surface at the time. Maybe when we got the rains later after the drought, some of these chemicals are coming out. So really, in the context of these types of facts, 150,000 gallons of jet fuel being dropped into the water that flows southeast right over our property, testing 50 wells seems like nothing. So if these 50 wells come back and they're clean, that doesn't mean that during the drought the contaminants were not absorbed by the limestone to be released as it rains during the next year. So the investigation has got to be much deeper than testing 50 wells.
Thank you.
Not a question.
Yes.
Hi. My question is, a few years ago, the big pharmacy company was coming and everybody was excited because we were all our property was worth like 3 times more if they would only came. And we all paid as taxpayers, we paid a lot of money for them to test all the water, to test all the land, to see if scripts could come. So what did they test? And how come, if they knew about it, if they had any kind of idea that there was some contamination, why the heck didn't they let scripts come? They could have cleaned it up. We could all sold our houses and be gone. But serious, did they find anything then? And if not, and if so, why didn't they tell us then? My question.
I think that's a good question. I don't have a specific answer to give you as to what testing was done in connection with the scripts development that I understand was scuttled in essence, or relocated rather. And I think that data, the point you really raised, is what did that data show? Did they collect groundwater data or other relevant environmental data is a very good point, and I appreciate that observation as a source of potentially useful information to answer these questions. We are getting pretty close to 8:30, so I gotta, sorry, but I gotta request that I think the people that are standing now, we're going to try to address each of your questions, but I think after that we're going to have to close. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. In reference to the well water, Evidently, there were about 50 that were tested. I don't mean to be repetitious because I heard the questions coming before me, but there's approximately 50 that were tested. There's thousands and thousands of residents in the acreage, and we're all hearing wonderful, fancy things, and we're talking basically hearsay and what we should do. But I would like to ask, what can we do now? Not what sounds good or what we should do for future reference. How can we all pool together and have all of the water tested, all of the soil, to find out who are victims, who are not victims? Some of us, I'm ill, thank God I haven't found cancer, but I have different situations. I have extreme asthma since I've lived out here for 6 years, all kinds of skin conditions, and we're all just sort of in the dark, floating around. What do we do? What do we do? We're getting very evasive answers. So I want to know, what can we do now? Not tomorrow, but now. Where do we go from here?
Well, one thing in terms of privately what you can do, the first step, I think, is to work with your healthcare provider, to work with your physicians. You can also bring in, I know some families have tried to access other universities. Some have gone to Duke University, some have gone to University of Miami. As a community, I think collectively, you can try and find and identify those experts who have some experience with these kinds of conditions. That can be shared certainly among yourselves. But you do need to work with certainly your medical provider. The other issue is regarding the local options with your health department. I know that takes a little longer, but certainly if you have health concerns, it's imperative that you find that expert in the field to assist you and to assist your family. That would be my first suggestion. If you think you're at risk, I know there are some children where parents have needed, because they are worried, have had CAT scans, and certainly there are dangers inherent with that. But again, you do need, those are medical opinions, those are medical approaches, and you have to consult an expert on those matters. Yes?
And may I ask you, in reference to the well water, going back to that, because only 50 were tested, how do all the families pool together to say, we want it tested, we don't want to just sit back and wait, the soil, like that woman said, we would like to have that tested, not just wait and wonder?
Again, you're going back into the private options that you have. Certainly, the other issue would be to find a company that has an excellent reputation, and perhaps Lem can help in terms of guiding, in terms of what to look for. But the important point there is that whoever you hire to do that has to know what they're looking for. It may not be your typical basic water, well water test. It really has to be something that, again, because we don't know what we're looking for yet, but it has to be more extensive, I think, than your typical general well check. But let's check with Lem in terms of what other communities have done, and is there any particular standard of testing that you should be researching?
I think let me respond two ways. I think first, I think your question, as I heard it, included an element, what can we do to get our water tested by the government, basically?
Correct, and I think a lot of us are running out of money too.
Yes.
The houses are upside down.
Yes, and let me address that. Let me address that directly. You don't have to all get together and assert pressure, political pressure, requests, all at the same time. You can do it all individually. There's power in numbers. So if the health department and your elected officials and the government officials who make the decisions of the allocation of resources by the health department, by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, receive letters and emails and phone calls from hundreds of people, that is very powerful. And that's what I would recommend as the number one step.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm one of the lucky ones that doesn't have anybody sick. I'm also lucky in that I own a house in Tampa that I'm moving to this month. I have a house here that I can't sell, I can't rent. Are there mortgages out there that the companies are gonna help us? Because my house is gonna sit there and I'm gonna walk away from it if I have to. And I don't wanna do that. What is your legal advice to all of us, especially the ones who are gonna wait for the results? I don't have to.
I don't know at this time that we have an answer for that. However, I live in the city of Parkland, and it was one of the communities that had significant incidents of Chinese drywall. And again, they work with their legislators, those in the community. These were brand new homes, brand new, some of them were between $500 and $1 million that were then diminished in value, some of them by 60%. And some even more. So the remediation was very high. So the first thing the community did was they did work with their legislators to try to go about, and Senator Nelson also was very much involved with that. So again, I would go back to those representatives, use the Chinese drywall as an example because it's something that's happening right now in this state, and look at what other kinds of remedies are there. Now the difference there is with the Chinese drywall, they can test to assure that it's there. It's a little more apparent. In your community, you're in a position where we don't know the cause at this time. So that's a difference, but anticipating the issue regarding the property values, again, you really do need all of you to be in touch with all of your elected officials, to constantly be looking at, how can we address this and what are some of our options. And certainly, foreclosures are areas that all over our state particularly were impacted by. And again, what kind of relief is there? And I know someone mentioned, well, let's call President Obama, but you know what? We kind of look to the feds too, because you may certainly need relief. So look at all your options, knock on every door, and you're fortunate in that you do have an option. But many people here tonight don't. So we're living in fear of what if. And I think you need to make that known in terms of the urgency. Again, you've got to go through those public officials.
Hello. Yes, in 1987, we built our first house off Orange Boulevard in the Acreage. And in 1998, I was diagnosed with a fibrotic cyst in my left temporal lobe of my brain. In the year 2000, we sold that house, and the new buyer was using an FHA loan in which they had to come in and test our well. They did find something poisonous in the well at that time, and I did not put two and two together, but I'm asking you now, how do I go about finding out who tested the water and exactly what was in that water at that time?
How long ago was this?
Year 2000 is when we sold the house.
Is that when the test was done?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. One thing did you have a closing agent or a title company?
Yes, I did.
Okay. The first advice I would have is to try to go back to find those records in terms of who were the banks involved on the FHA loan, and to go back and look at on the closing statement. Sometimes they will have costs assigned for certain testing. In other words, someone had to pay for that, and at times there are specific references to various, for example, your surveyor will be mentioned, someone who does a lien search, an abstract. So my first advice would be to go back and try to track the documents. The other option is to go back and check with the bank in terms of who ordered it. If it was the bank who ordered it, they should be able to track some of those records because they were the ones who employed the person who tested. So again, you're going to have to go back and track those documents. And as a matter of point, because real estate and your property is involved, you all do need to look at various insurances that you do have. You have title insurance, there's defects, hidden defects, who had knowledge, did anyone else have knowledge? Now you say you didn't put the two together.
No, ma'am.
But, you know, when people do have knowledge, did developers have knowledge, did real estate agents, you know, that's where the investigation starts. But that would be my suggestion to you, is to go back and try and track those records and the bank contact.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, I'm in the construction business. I think there's a high degree of probability it isn't the landfill, because the same type of landfill material is used in various other communities where they're not experiencing this type of tumors. It seems to be that the highest degree of probability is likely the Pratt Whitney experimental cancer, which I think I heard matched from Connecticut to down here in certain examples. So my question is, was there an EPA investigation in Connecticut? Was there a lawsuit? Was there a cleanup? What happened in Connecticut, and how many matches did you find in the acreage that actually matched what you found in Connecticut?
Let me fill in some of those details, because I think those are important. It's important to understand that the subject of the epidemiologic study that's ongoing in the Connecticut Pratt Whitney facilities involved workers who worked in the facility. It was not neighbors who lived around those facilities. So the question, and the young man asked a very good question earlier, was there remediation in those instances? And I don't know the answer to that, but there is some probability that there also was neighborhood contamination from the facilities. I don't know the answer, and I think that's a very good question. But the focus of the study was on workers, not members of the community. The importance of that study, to me, in my mind, is that, as you mentioned, there was significant overlap between the kinds of brain tumors and cancers that are being seen and dealt with in this community. So that suggested to me that at least there is a potential that if those chemicals left that property and left that facility and got to this community, they have the ability to cause those same kinds of problems here if those chemicals were used here as in Connecticut. In terms of the litigation, there's not good news. There was litigation, and the litigation was dismissed on statute of limitation grounds. But an important difference, again, is, and the important factor there was that the plaintiffs in that lawsuit were workers. And so the judge found that day in and day out, working with these chemicals, they were on notice, in effect, that these kinds of chemicals could be harmful. But the key thing was they knew they were working with them. It wasn't an insidious, unknown migration of chemicals off-site where the exposed population was exposed unwittingly. And that's a very important key to that unfortunate but negative outcome.
What is the statute of limitations, and how many years for such a matter?
Well, in the state of Florida, there are two categories in terms of the statute of limitations, and one has to do with wrongful death. And in wrongful death cases, the question is, when does the clock start ticking? And in some cases, that does begin with the time of the death. And when did you know what the cause of that death was? But again, I will defer to Lem in terms of some federal cases where there have been opportunities to look at when should that begin, and when was there notice, and when was there evidence. When there are injuries, again, where there hasn't been a wrongful death, then again, the statute of limitations is a little bit longer. But again, it's told again by when did we know? When did we have notice? When was there a general, reasonable expectation for that causation. And again, it's a case-by-case basis. Attorneys are going to try to stretch that as long as they possibly can, using all various regulations and laws and cases at various levels. But again, the more difficult cases are those where there's been a death. So there's no definite answer there because it is really a case-by-case basis. And again, knowing when the moment is of notice and evidence, becomes very critical.
It was another level. We were not involved. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, because you've been involved with other cases involving soil and water contaminants, what types of cancers are commonly associated with the suspected contaminants that are being brought up in this situation? Are there types of cancers that are commonly associated?
My hesitation here is I can't tell you this evening what kinds of chemicals we're looking at. In some ways, well, I can tell you this. We have, in essence, looked backwards. We know there are certain kinds of cancers in the community. Focus on the brain tumors, the gliomas. We generally know from toxicological literature that radiation is a risk factor for brain tumors from a number of different sources, but the studies tell us that people exposed to radiation have higher incident rates of brain tumors. We also know that other kinds of compounds are linked to those kinds of cancers. So that's been our focus now. Are there other cancers that have been linked to those same chemicals? I think the answer is generally yes. There are other kinds of cancers, for example, that are strongly linked to radiation. I don't have a list right in front of me that I could provide you with useful or helpful information on that. But there is a resource available, and I apologize for not having the exact link, but it's called something like the Collaborative on Environmental Health. Its acronym is CEH. And it's a pretty good publicly available screening tool that you can look at an illness and it correlates it at least a very basic level to the science, saying these are the kinds of chemicals linked by toxicological evidence to this kind of cancer. You also can do a search by chemical. So if you put in ionizing radiation, it will give you a list and some rough indication of the strength of the toxicological literature. So that's a resource. I don't recommend it, but I use it and find it useful.
Well, I just think it's important that people think about that when they're worrying about what kind of cancer am I going to get, or I have cancer and it's because the water is contaminated, that maybe they need to have a resource or some way that they can at least find some information and maybe comfort in knowing that maybe they're okay or they're not connected. You know, their kids aren't going to get whatever type of cancer yes. because they're bathing in the water.
I think that's a very fair point. One other resource I would mention that can be useful is I believe it's under the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control website. They have a link to an agency known as the ATSDR, which is the Agency for Toxic Substance Disease Registry. It's kind of a sister agency of the CDC. It's a very cautious agency. It was tasked under Congress to look at the health link between exposure to hazardous substances from federal Superfund sites and ill effects in the community. And unfortunately, they haven't really ever discharged that mandate. but they do have toxicological profiles on their website that again provide useful information between different kinds of adverse health effects and different kinds of hazardous substances that are in the environment.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, for all those who have cancer and tumors, my heart goes out to you. There are approximately 52,000 acres in the acreage in Loxahatchee. Okay, that means approximately 52,000. Some lots are not built up yet, obviously, but that's a lot of families. Okay, not everybody will get the cancer or the tumors. These things that are going on now, there's a lot of other things that are going on, a lot of other health issues. Myself in particular, I have skin problems now that I'd never had before. Just about 24 hours a day, my skin is on fire. It's a type of dermatitis. It's caused by something. I happen to notice that every time I get in the shower, it gets worse. That's just a start. It's been going on about a little less than a year and a half. I have been in the acreage since September of 1994. I've never had any skin problems. What happens when, this is kind of like a bigger question, what happens when and if this is something that winds up going to trial? What happens if something that, are they going to just limit it to people with cancer and tumors? What about people that have other health issues? I have friends with other health issues that live out here as well. You mentioned earlier about water systems and changing it from one kind of a water softening system to another. Okay, in case you all haven't realized this, our economy sucks at the moment, okay? Not everybody can afford to change their water system. It is expensive. It's approximately $3,000 to $5,000 or more just to change the water system. The private wells that you stressed earlier, okay, they may be private wells, but what about the taxes that we pay to own our property that should actually pay for the testing of the wells and the soil and whatever else out here needs to be tested? And another thing, the results of the test that was supposed to be given today, why are they holding them back? I'm sure there are some people who have cancer and tumors that can't wait for these answers, that need their answers now. How can we push for those answers to come out now instead of September? Granted, September is only a week away, but I know there are people that cannot wait because I know of some friends that have died because of the cancer. So how do we push for these answers to come out now? And what about the other things like paying for the wells to be checked out of public money that we pay out in our taxes? Yes, that's another thing. All our taxes, our property taxes got raised, but the value of our homes are going down. Okay? And if they're talking about the dirt roads, I'll be honest, okay, I may not make friends with some of you. I moved out here for the dirt roads and the quiet and the less traffic. I didn't move out here to live on a paved road, okay? I like living on a dirt road. I like the quiet. I like the fact that people don't speed up and down the block, all right?
I think you've raised a number of very important and difficult points. Let me do the best I can with them quickly because I do want to get to the last woman with a question. And let me say this, as to other injuries, I remember the hat, sorry. As to other injuries, if you remember the 3 elements of a toxic tort lawsuit, those principles generally apply to any injury. So if an environmental contaminant is identified and somebody's wrongful conduct that caused that contaminant to be in your well, to be in your home, can be identified, whatever illness or damage or injury that fairly can be traced and proven to that chemical can receive redress.
Here's
It
the
doesn't
thing.
have to be a particular kind of cancer.
Right.
It just has to be supported as more likely than not by evidence. So that's the answer to your question about what happens at trial with respect to
Here's the thing, where my
injuries.
skin condition is concerned, I have been through a biopsy so far, and I've been through 3 different allergy tests to try and find out what it is. Everything is inconclusive.
Yes.
Okay?
That is the challenge in this field. Science leaves a lot of questions unanswered. And so, unfortunately, there is not legal redress for every injury or damage because it requires a level of proof that, unfortunately, in some cases cannot be obtained. So that's the pathway, and either the evidence showing that causal link can be developed through a number of ways, and there are different approaches used to take that, different kinds of tests that can be done, but not every injury is traceable to a specific thing. That's the unfortunate reality. As to the payment for the tests, again, because I know that is a big, big, big issue. You do pay property taxes. I don't know exactly where that money goes in this community. It probably goes to your municipality or to the county. And so wherever your property tax money goes is a good place to advocate that that entity that receives your property taxes on these properties should fund testing to help answer this question, so that banks can make mortgages if an environmental factor is thoroughly looked for and can't be found. And so you can have the resources to get those wells tested so that they are not an ongoing source of concern. If that is not successful, the state has the ability also to do testing. They're the ones that are testing the 50 wells. They could, if persuaded to, expand that testing. And so, in my view, that's the key point for the mobilization of public resources to help answer these questions in this community.
Okay, what about the part about the results are coming out in September?
Yes.
Why is it we have to wait when they've got the testing done? And the 50 wells isn't even a small sampling of 52,000 acres.
That's right. It's a very limited kind of a screening number. The only thing I can say on that is there are 2 steps. When the samples are taken, they are submitted to an analytical chemical laboratory, and at that time, the speed of the analysis is requested. The faster you get the results back, typically the more you pay for them. So those were determined, submitted to a lab, either at the state or a private lab under a certain turnaround time. After the results come back to the state, hopefully they will promptly transmit those to the community. But the agency to talk to about the turnaround and is it possible to speed up the release of those results is the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
But that's not answering my question.
Or a state agency that could, or a state representative that could put pressure on them to release them quicker.
That didn't answer my question. I wanted to know, obviously, these test results are supposed to be due out today. So they obviously got them done. Why do we have to wait until September, and how can we force their hand to give us the results that we all want? Because I'm telling you, not everybody wants to wait. I certainly don't.
Okay, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought we were talking about the well results, but I think you're talking about the cancer study results that were to be released
I'm
today.
talking about all the results that were supposed to be released today, including the well water, including the cancer study, everything.
Okay. My understanding from the articles I read in the press was that the results of the cancer study done by the State Department of Health were to be released earlier this afternoon, and then that didn't happen. It's not my understanding that the groundwater or the drinking water well sample results were to be released today. As to and where could you advocate for the cancer study results to be released as quickly as possible?
How do you push them to do it?
How do you push them? The pressure point is the state health department and your state elected officials, because it is helpful and pivotal, I think, that Senator Nelson's office was in connection with that study, and that would be a place to call and see if they have any ideas. He is a federal official, and he may well have the ability to influence the state and the timing of state agencies, but generally speaking, it is important to focus the advocacy at the level of government that is holding the information or is handling the information that you want. That's the best answer I can give.
Just one other thing, and I've had this happen in other groups where we've been outraged in terms of inaction or untimely delays, is literally you get a group of the largest number of people you can have, make signs, go down to the health department, go down to wherever you need to do. You'll get a lot of press attention, and you're basically demanding results. You're making your demands be known. If it's the property appraiser's office, but you've got to mobilize, you've got to get those signs out, and if you need it urgent, then you've got to step up the advocacy and the mobilization as one possibility, but it's effective.
We have gone well past 8:30. There are two people that have been standing very patiently for a long time, and my question is this: could we address your questions outside the auditorium? I'm happy to spend as much time with both of you as you would like. No. Could you do it quickly then? Okay, very quickly. I believe this lady right here is first. These, sir, are the last two questions. This lady here and the gentleman. Sir, I'm happy to talk to you out of the auditorium as long as is appropriate. But we've got to end it sometime. Yeah. Oh, you're going to talk outside?
Good evening.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. I congratulate the panel, but most of all, I congratulate the residents of the Acreage here for banding together and coming together to address the problem. My name is Ms. Mary Brown, and I live in the Riviera Beach area, and I am an advocate against any environmental issues. But I'm going to address my question to Ms. Marilyn because I know that you will be most helpful in the community in which I live in. Solartron infested our water. Solartron devices, Honeywell, with the cancer-causing effects. Our government petitioned the government, and last year they decided to come in with the super funds to help us clean up our water. I do not drink water. In our neighborhood and in our community, dozens have died, more than dozens, but that's just one of the things. Also, too, if you all think that you all have it bad, I'm battling a metal company, trademark metal recycling, that wants to come into our community, right next to a housing complex with babies and children and seniors. And I've been battling this issue ever since 2007. Have been able to table it on my council commissioner's desk. This is going to come up on our agenda on September the 2nd. I have had 700 residents to petition against this. You're talking about environmental issues. Also in the neighborhood is a gravel rock pit, dust, sand. A lot of the residents have just died out. It's because of our government. And once again, I'm encouraging everyone to band together, do what you have to do. I've been all in the paper. The news media has came out and gave reports about various sites. And we should hold our government responsible for the recklessness that they causes within our communities. So I would like to say, I thank you, and I would like to get in contact, with you. Riviera Beach, Florida, I'm quite sure everybody knows Riviera Beach, and we have tremendous problems out there, and these are just some of the ice, but it's not the tipping. Thank you.
I thank you very much, ma'am. Let me make one real quick point. I know many of you may have additional questions that we simply don't have time to address. We've left our contact emails and Jessica's number up on the screen. If any of you have questions that you would like to pose to us that we just didn't have time to address this evening, if you could please submit them to Jess, we will do our best to get back to you as quickly as we can. This, sir, is the last question.
I live on 47th Road North. About 6 months ago, they put down a black shaving asphalt tailings. After it dried out, it formed a very fine dust. Now, I was amazed after researching it. This is as dangerous as Agent Orange. After I contacted the people like you said I should contact, the health department, CDC, and so on, they sort of hem-hawed around. I got on the internet, there's over 1,000 suits on this stuff. Why are we even using asphalt tailings? Because it's the biggest garbage pile they can't dump anywhere. You cannot bury it. So what happened is when I went to our board at Indian Trail, magically, after I told them all the suits and they studied my history, my works appeared on Dateline in 2020, that they dug up my road in a week, cost them 12 grand, and they put my junk on somebody else's road. Now, I hate to say this, you two attorneys seem a little naive. Yeah. Now, I took on International Paper and Masonite and Polyfood Lane, and I beat them all. Now, I contacted my state officials. Senator Erin Brockovich, who wants to be an attorney general, didn't have time for me. And then I called Mr. Domino's office, and he was too busy. But I'm glad you're here. See, and other people I've contacted. Now, I'm not saying that the CDC and EPA is going to lie to you, but they won't tell you the whole truth.
I think you raised very good questions. Perhaps I am naive. But I think that there is power in advocacy. I think your story about the asphalt shavings indicates that, because when you identified a problem and when you presented the proof to the entity responsible for paving the road, they picked the stuff up. Was it a good thing they put it on somebody else's road? No, it's not. But you made a difference, and I think that's the important part. And that's really what I think we're trying to convey here, is that you have to do whatever you can to make the difference and to make your community and your home as safe as you can. And I think your example is a very, very good.
I'd like to give you another suggestion. You could contact all the your state representatives you want. The most powerful people you have to back your problems is the media. However, here's the bad part. Investigative reporting is 98% dead.
Thank you, sir. We do have to close the meeting. So I really appreciate everyone coming out and helping the community understand and address these issues.
Very nice.